The freight wagon rolled into Copper Bend on a Tuesday afternoon, its bed full of human cargo chained like animals. Most townspeople turned away from what they didn't want to see, but Marcus Brennan had spent too many years running from ghosts to look away from the living. When he saw the two Apache women towering over their captors, even while bound, something ancient and furious stirred in the hollow place where his heart used to beat. He didn't know their names yet, didn't know they'd refused to leave him, didn't know his silence would finally break, but he knew, with the certainty of a man who'd already lost everything, that walking away would cost him the only thing he had left. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Brennan stepped off the supply rig with the careful movements of a man whose size made people nervous. 6'5", shoulders like a barn door, hands scarred from 15 years of breaking horses and burying the dead. His coat hung open despite the autumn cold, and his hat sat low enough to shadow a face that hadn't smiled since the fever took his daughter 3 winters back. The town moved around him like water around stone. He didn't belong here, not really, just passed through every 6 weeks to trade pelts and buy flour, salt, ammunition, the kind of supplies a man needed when he lived 20 miles from anyone who might hear him scream. He preferred it that way. Copper Bend squatted in a valley between red rock walls, the kind of town built by men who struck copper once and spent the rest of their lives digging for what wasn't there anymore. False front buildings lined a single mud street. The saloon leaked piano music that never quite found its rhythm. Somewhere a dog barked, relentless and ignored. Marcus loaded his pack mule with methodical precision. 50-pound flour sack, 20 pounds of salt, coffee beans wrapped in burlap, fish hooks, 3 boxes of cartridges. He didn't speak to the store clerk, didn't nod at the men smoking outside the assayer's office. He'd learned that silence kept people from asking questions, and questions led to conversations, and conversations required a version of himself he'd buried along with his wife and child. The wagon appeared at the far end of the street just as he cinched the last strap. At first it looked like any freight hauler canvas top, iron-rimmed wheels cutting roots through half-frozen mud. But then Marcus saw the driver, a thin man with a beard like steel wool, and beside him another man cradling a shotgun across his lap. Neither looked like freight haulers. They looked like men who'd grown comfortable with cruelty. The wagon stopped outside the territorial office. That's when Marcus heard it, the rattle of chains. He didn't turn right away. Told himself it wasn't his concern. Told himself he'd seen worse in the doing. War. That the world was full of suffering he couldn't fix, that he'd given up saving people the day he couldn't save the ones who mattered. But his hands had stopped moving, and his eyes had found the back of that wagon, and what he saw there turned his stomach cold. 2 women. Apache, by the look of them, high cheekbones, black hair thick as rope, skin the color of burnished copper. But it was their size that made Marcus's breath catch. They weren't just tall, they were massive. The first had to be 6'3", maybe more. Shoulders broad as a man's, thighs thick with the kind of muscle that came from a lifetime of walking hard in the country. The second was even taller, 6'5" easy, with hands that could palm a man's skull. Sisters, he guessed, from the matching set of their faces and the way they sat, pressed together despite the chains. Heavy iron shackles bound their wrists and ankles. The chain between them was short enough that they had to move in unison or not at all. Their dresses were torn, caked with road dust and darker stains that might have been blood. The older one's lip was split, swollen purple. The younger had a gash across her forehead that had bled and dried and bled again. But what struck Marcus most was their eyes, not defeated, not pleading, just watching, calculating, measuring the distance between chains and freedom, like wolves counting the seconds before the trap springs. Hell of a catch, ain't they? The voice came from beside him. Jessup, the liveryman, a fat man who smelled of whiskey and horse piss, took him from a slaver camp up near the Gila. Word is they killed 2 handlers before they got the chains on proper. Marcus didn't respond. Big as bulls, both of 'em, Jessup continued, warming to his subject. Fetch a good price down in Mexico, I reckon. Copper mines always need strong backs, and Apache women work till they drop. He spat tobacco juice into the mud, probably for the best. Their kind don't belong up here, anyhow. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept loading the mule. From the territorial office, a man emerged, Deputy Walsh, stringy and officious, with a badge that gave him authority he'd never earned through competence. He approached the wagon, one hand resting on his pistol like he was afraid the women might snap their chains through will alone. You got papers? Walsh called up to the driver. The thin man produced a folded document. Salvage claim. Found him wandering near Fort Defiance, no tribe markings, no protections. Territorial law says we can bind and sell. Salvage, Walsh repeated, unfolding the paper with theatrical slowness. That's a fancy word for slave trading, Carver. The driver, Carver, smiled without warmth. Call it what you want. Law's the law. We're taking them south to Tucson, then over the border, just stopping for water and grain. You got a bill of sale? Got a writ from Judge Holbrook in Santa Fe. Says any Apache found without tribal affiliation can be claimed as salvage under the Indian Removal Act. These 2 got no papers, no family, nothing. They're ours, legal as land. Walsh studied the document, lips moving as he read. Behind him more townspeople had gathered, drawn by curiosity and the promise of spectacle. Marcus recognized faces. Brennan the baker, Ida Colfax from the boarding house, young Tommy Reeves who worked the telegraph. None of them looked comfortable, but none looked away either. They got names? Walsh asked. Don't speak English, Carver said, or won't. Don't matter much, either way. In the wagon bed, the older sister lifted her head. Her eyes found Marcus across the street, held him there like a hook in flesh. She didn't plead, didn't beg. Just looked at him the way his daughter had looked at him the night the fever spiked, like he was the last solid thing in a world tilting toward darkness. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Not pity, not sympathy. Something older and more dangerous, recognition. He saw himself in those chains, saw the night he'd stood helpless, while the doctor shook his head, while his wife screamed herself hoarse, while his daughter's breathing went shallow and stopped. He'd been chained then too, chained by helplessness and grief, and the terrible knowledge that some things can't be fixed, no matter how strong you are. But this could be fixed. This was different. Load up, Carver called to his partner. We're burning daylight. Now hold on, Walsh said, but he was already stepping back, already deciding this wasn't his problem. Just make sure you're gone by sundown. Don't need that kind of trouble lingering. Marcus tied off the last strap on the mule. His hands moved automatically now, disconnected from the decision forming in his mind, like ice crystals in supercooled water present, but not yet solid, waiting for the right disturbance to snap into pattern. You gonna watch 'em haul those women off? Jessup asked, following Marcus's gaze. Hell, maybe it's mercy. Better than starving in the hills. Marcus turned his head slowly. Jessup took a step back. Despite himself, something in the big man's face had gone very still, very cold. You ever been chained? Marcus asked, voice low as distant thunder. I know, but then keep your mercy to yourself. Marcus untied the mule from the hitching post. His hands were steady. His mind was clear for the first time in 3 years, clear the way it got before a fight, before violence, before the moment when a man stops thinking and starts acting on the truth that lives in his bones. He walked toward the wagon. Carver saw him coming and tensed. The partner with the shotgun sat up straighter. Deputy Walsh's hand drifted toward his pistol, uncertain whether he was watching a confrontation or just a curious passerby. Marcus stopped at the tailgate. Up close, The chains were worse, thick iron links meant for livestock, shackles rubbed raw, against ankles and wrists. The younger sister's foot was bleeding where the metal had worn through to bone. Neither woman flinched as he approached. They just watched him with those same calculating eyes, waiting to see what kind of man he was. "Help you?" Carver asked, voice sharp with suspicion. "These women," Marcus said. "What are you asking for them?" Silence dropped like a hammer. Even the piano music from the saloon seemed to pause. Carver's eyes narrowed. "They ain't for sale to settlers. Got a buyer lined up in Mexico. I didn't ask about your buyer. Asked what you're asking. $300 each." Carver's smile was a blade. "That's 600 total, case you can't cipher. More money than you see in 5 years of trapping." Marcus reached into his coat. Every man within 20 feet tensed hands, moving toward weapons, bodies shifting into defensive postures. But Marcus just pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coin. He'd been saving for 2 years, planning to buy out the surveyor's claim on his land, make it legal and final. $640 in gold and silver. He dumped it on the tailgate. "Count it," he said. Carver stared at the pile like it might bite him. "You're joking." "Count it." The slaver reached forward slowly, fingers sifting through coins. His lips moved as he tallied. The silence stretched so thin Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, slow and certain. 640, Carver said finally, voice hollow with disbelief. "You're actually buying them." "I'm buying their chains off," Marcus corrected. "What they do after that's their choice. That ain't how salvage works. You buy 'em, they're yours. Property, same as a horse, or unlock the chains." Something in Marcus's voice made the words an inevitability rather than a request. Carver looked at his partner, at Deputy Walsh, at the crowd. No one moved to stop him. No one wanted to be the first to stand between a man this size and whatever he'd decided to do. Carver fished out a key ring, climbed into the wagon bed. The chains rattled as he unlocked the shackles, first the ankles, then the wrists. The women didn't move, didn't run, just rubbed their raw skin and watched Marcus with expressions he couldn't read. "There," Carver said, pocketing the money. "They're yours. Good luck with them. Apache women are as mean as snakes and twice as likely to bite." Marcus ignored him. He looked at the sisters, tried to find words, and found none. So he just stepped back, gestured to the open street. "You're free," he said. "Go wherever you want." The older sister stood first. She moved like thunder rolling across mountains, slow, inevitable, powerful. When she reached her full height, she topped Marcus by 2 inches. Up close, he could see scars on her arms, old burns on her hands, the marks of a life spent fighting. Her sister stood beside her, even taller, younger but no less dangerous. They looked at the town, at the faces watching them, at the road leading north, south, east, west. Then they looked at Marcus. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The older one said something in Apache, a question sharp and direct. Marcus shook his head. "Don't understand." She tried again in broken Spanish. "Por qué?" Why? The only question that mattered. Marcus had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow. So he told the truth the only way he knew how. "Seemed wrong," he said, "leaving you chained." The sisters exchanged a look, some communication that didn't need words. Then the older one pointed at Marcus's mule, at his supplies, at the road leading out of town. "We come," she said in English, so halting it hurt to hear. "With you. You don't have to we come." It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty Marcus felt in his own bones. These women had made a decision, and arguing would be like arguing with gravity. "You sure?" he asked. The younger sister smiled for the first time, a fierce, dangerous expression that suggested she'd killed men with less provocation than doubt. "We come," the older one repeated. Marcus nodded once. He didn't know their names, didn't know their story, didn't know what he'd just set in motion, but he unteed the mule, handed the rope to the older sister, and started walking. Behind them, Copper Bend erupted in whispers. Deputy Walsh called out something about responsibility and consequences, but his voice faded quickly. Carver stuffed the money in his coat and drove away, already forgetting the cargo he'd just sold. The townspeople watched until the three figures, one massive white man and two towering Apache women, disappeared into the scrub pine beyond the red rock walls. The sun was 3 hours from setting when they left the road. Marcus led them east, into country where the pines grew thick and the ground stayed soft with old needles. Neither sister complained about the pace, though they had to be exhausted. They just walked, silent and watchful, scanning the tree line like women who'd learned to expect ambush. He didn't try to make conversation. What would he say? Instead, he focused on the trail, on the placement of each step, on the familiar rhythm of a walk he'd made 100 times before. The mule plodded behind him. The sisters followed. The forest closed around them like a fist. An hour out, the younger sister stumbled. Her leg gave out the one with the bleeding ankle, and she went down hard. Marcus turned just as the older sister caught her, easing her to the ground with surprising gentleness. "Wait here," Marcus said. He found a creek 100 yards north, soaked his bandana in the cold water, brought it back. The older sister took it, cleaned her sister's wound with practiced efficiency. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus and said a single word that might have been thanks or might have been acknowledgement. He couldn't tell. They rested for 10 minutes. Then they walked again. By the time his cabin appeared through the trees, small, dark, smoke-stained from 3 years of lonely fires, the sun had turned the western sky, the color of old blood. Marcus stopped at the tree line, suddenly uncertain. He'd lived alone so long the cabin had become an extension of his solitude, a place where grief could spread out and settle in corners. Bringing people here felt like a violation, like disturbing a grave. But the sisters were waiting, swaying slightly from exhaustion, and there was nowhere else to go. "It's not much," he said, and pushed open the door. Inside smelled of old smoke, coffee grounds, and the particular loneliness of a man who'd stopped caring whether things were clean. A single room, bed against one wall, table and 2 chairs, hearth where embers still glowed from the morning fire. Shelves held supplies, cornmeal, beans, jerked venison. On the mantel, a blue ribbon faded to grey, and beside it, a small wooden horse he'd carved for a daughter who never got to play with it. The sisters stood in the doorway, filling the frame, uncertain whether to enter. "Come in," Marcus said. "I'll get the fire going." They stepped inside together, moving as a unit, and Marcus realized they'd probably spent their whole lives that way together, synchronized, 2 parts of a single organism. The older one touched the table, the chair, the shelf of supplies, like she was learning the language of this new space. The younger one moved to the hearth, knelt despite her wounded ankle, and began feeding the fire with kindling Marcus had left stacked beside the stones. He watched them settle in, these strange, fierce women he'd bought free on impulse, and felt something shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Not warmth exactly, not comfort, just the presence of life where there'd been only its absence. Marcus pulled venison from the shelf, set a pot of water to boil. Neither sister watched him, they were too busy watching everything else, cataloguing exits and weapons and potential threats. "Apache women," Carver had said. "Mean as snakes." But Marcus saw something else. Women who'd survived what should have killed them, who'd been chained and beaten and sold like animals, but still stood tall, still chose to walk into a stranger's house rather than die alone in the desert. He knew that choice. He'd made it himself once, the morning after he buried his daughter, when every rational thought said to put a bullet in his brain, but his body kept breathing anyway, kept walking, kept moving forward through pure animal stubbornness. The water boiled. Marcus made something that could generously be called stew venison beans, the last of his wild onions. He served it in wooden bowls, set them on the table. The sisters ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which they probably hadn't. No one spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the point, first stars appeared. When the meal was finished, Marcus pointed to the bed. "You take it, both of you. I'll sleep on the floor." The older sister shook her head, said something in Apache, then in English. "No, she gestured to the floor, to herself and her sister. "Here, you're injured. Take the bed." She stood a wall of muscle and determination and repeated, "Here." Marcus recognized the futility of arguing. He fetched blankets, laid them near the hearth. The sisters wrapped themselves together, the younger one's head on the older one's shoulder, and within minutes both were asleep, exhausted beyond the point where pride mattered. Marcus sat at the table, watching them breathe. The younger one's foot was still bleeding through the bandage. The older one's split lip would scar. But they were alive, and they were here, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, that felt like the first right thing Marcus had done since the day his world ended. He didn't sleep that night, just sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of other people breathing in his home, and wondered what morning would bring. Morning light crept through the shutters in pale strips, turning the cabin's dust motes into drifting constellations. Marcus woke with his neck screaming in protest, the chair having extracted its price for serving as a bed. The blankets by the hearth lay empty, folded with military precision. The sisters were gone. His hand moved toward the rifle propped beside the door, before his brain caught up with his instincts. Then he heard it, the sound of water being poured, the soft scrape of metal on stone. He stood, joints popping, and found them outside. The older sister knelt by the rain barrel, using his wash basin to clean her sister's swollen ankle. Dawn painted them in copper and shadow. She worked with the concentration of someone who'd done this before, many times in worse circumstances. The younger one sat on the chopping stump, jaw clenched against pain. She refused to voice. Marcus approached slowly, the way he'd approach a nervous horse. "That needs proper cleaning," he said. The older sister looked up. Her eyes held no gratitude, no warmth, just assessment, calculating whether he was a threat or a lie, whether his kindness yesterday had been a transaction or something more permanent. "I have carbolic," Marcus continued, "and clean linen, better than creek water." A long silence, then the older sister nodded once. Inside, Marcus retrieved his medical supplies, a dented metal box his wife had kept stocked back when there were people to tend. Carbolic acid in a brown bottle, rolled bandages, a needle and catgut thread, sulfur powder, the contents of a life lived far from doctors, where every injury was a negotiation with death. He boiled water while the sisters watched from opposite sides of the room, maintaining distance like wild animals, not yet convinced the trap wouldn't spring. When the water cooled enough, he soaked a cloth and gestured to the younger sister. She hesitated, then sat at the table, extending her damaged ankle. Up close, the wound was worse than he'd thought. The shackle had worn through skin and into the underlying flesh, creating a groove deep enough to expose the gleam of tendon. The edges were ragged, already showing the yellow tinge of infection. If left untreated, it would turn septic within days. "This is going to hurt," Marcus said, meeting her eyes. She said something in Apache, sharp, defiant. Her sister translated, "She says she has known worse." Marcus believed it. He poured carbolic directly into the wound. The younger sister's entire body went rigid, muscles standing out like cables under her skin, but she made no sound. just gripped the table edge hard enough, the wood creaked. Her sister moved closer, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not comfort exactly, more like an anchor, reminder that pain was temporary, but they were permanent. Marcus worked quickly, cleaned the wound until it ran clear, applied sulfur powder, wrapped it in linen strips torn from an old shirt. His hands remembered this work, even though his heart had tried to forget, remembered his wife, teaching him how to dress wounds, how to recognize infection, how to save people when God and distance meant no one else would. "Needs changing twice daily," he said when he finished. "Morning and night. Keep weight off it for at least a week." The older sister nodded. Then she extended her own wrists, turned them to show where the manacles had rubbed through. The wounds were shallower but wider, raw bracelets of damaged flesh that would scar permanent. Marcus treated them with the same careful silence, aware that these women had probably never voluntarily submitted to a white man's touch before. Each dab of carbolic was a small act of trust, fragile as spring ice. When he finished, he bandaged both wrists, while the younger sister watched from the table, her face unreadable. "Your lip," Marcus said to the older one, indicating the split that had scabbed but not healed properly. She touched it gingerly, then shook her head. "Is nothing. Could get infected. I have survived worse." She said it the same way her sister had, like a catechism they'd learned together. Survival not as achievement, but as simple fact, as inevitable as breathing. Marcus put the medical supplies away. Outside, the sun had cleared the ridgeline, throwing long shadows through the pine forest. "I need to check my trapline," he said. "There's food in the pantry. Help yourselves." He expected them to still be wary, to watch him leave with suspicion. Instead, the older sister said, "We come. Your sister shouldn't walk on that ankle. Then I come." She looked at her sister, said something in Apache. The younger one responded, voice sharp with frustration, but didn't argue. Just settled back at the table, resigned to immobility. Marcus studied the older sister, this woman who'd spent yesterday in chains and now insisted on walking miles through rough country with a stranger. Looking for escape routes, probably. Mapping the land in case she needed to run. He couldn't blame her for that. "All right," he said, "but we're moving at my pace, not yours." Her smile was brief as lightning. "Then, move faster." The trapline snaked through 5 miles of forest, following game trails Marcus had memorized over 3 years of walking them alone. He moved from trap to trap with practiced efficiency, checking snares, resetting triggers, collecting what little the forest had provided. 2 rabbits. A fox he'd release, because the pelt wasn't worth the effort. The older sister walked behind him, silent as smoke, watching everything. At the 4th trap, he found a dear young buck that had broken its leg in the snare and couldn't flee. It watched them approach with eyes gone glassy from pain and exhaustion. Marcus drew his knife. "Wait," the older sister said. She knelt beside the deer, placed one hand on its neck, and spoke in Apache. Something low and rhythmic that sounded like prayer or apology or both. The deer's breathing slowed. Then she nodded to Marcus. He cut its throat quickly, mercifully. The blood steamed in the cold air. "Your people honor what you take," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Everything is borrowed," she replied. "Even breath." They field-dressed the deer together, working in the complementary silence of people who both knew their way around death. She had strong hands, capable hands, and she didn't hesitate at the blood or the smell. When they finished, Marcus tied the carcass to a carrying pole. She took one end without being asked. Walking back, the weight distributed between them, she finally spoke, "I am called Kiona. My sister is Chenoa." "Marcus, we know." The town woman spoke your name. "Said you are a dangerous man." He almost laughed. "Dangerous how?" She said you killed 3 men in war, that you live alone because you cannot be with people, that grief made you into stone. Kiona glanced at him. Is true? Parts of it. Which parts? Marcus adjusted his grip on the pole. I killed more than 3 men in the war. And grief doesn't make you stone, it makes you hollow. Stone is solid all the way through. Kiona nodded like he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. They walked another mile before she spoke again. Chenoa thinks you bought us from guilt. I think you bought us from recognition. Recognition of what? Of what it is to be owned by something that will not let you go. Marcus had no answer for that. The observation was too accurate, too clean, like a blade finding the gap between ribs. Back at the cabin, they found Chenoa had swept the floor, organized his scattered supplies into sensible groupings, and started a fire that burned clean and hot. She'd also fashioned a crutch from a fallen branch, stripped of bark and notched at the top. When Marcus entered with the deer, she was testing her weight on it, face tight with determination. "Sister," Kiona said sharply in Apache. Chenoa replied with equal sharpness. They argued briefly, the kind of argument that comes from years of knowing exactly what the other will say before they say it. Finally, Chenoa sat, but her expression promised this concession was temporary. Marcus hung the deer outside to age, then started breaking down the rabbits for stews. Kiona watched him work for a moment, then simply moved beside him and began preparing vegetables she'd found in his root cellar. Withered carrots, sprouting onions, potatoes that had seen better months. She worked without asking permission, claiming space in his kitchen through sheer assumption of belonging. That night they ate together at the table, all 3 of them, and the cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a place where people lived. Chenoa uttered left-handed to spare her bandaged ankle, scooping stew with practiced efficiency. Kiona ate slowly, methodically, like someone who'd learned to make food last during lean times. "How long were you with the slavers?" Marcus asked. Kiona's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. 4 weeks, maybe 5. Time was difficult to measure, and before that, we were with our people. Until we were not. She resumed eating, signaling the conversation had ended. But Chenoa spoke for the first time in English, her voice rougher than her sister's, accent thicker. They said we were too big, too different, that we brought shame by being born wrong. "Chenoa," Kiona began, "he should know. If he keeps us, he should know what we are." Marcus set down his spoon. "What you are is 2 women I saw chained in a wagon. That's all I need to know." Chenoa studied him with eyes that had learned not to trust easy words. "Our mother was Apache. Our father was white man trapper who stayed 1 winter, left 1 child, returned and left another. We grew tall like him, strong like him. The people said we were cursed. That giant, women bring bad medicine. Your people cast you out for your size? They cast us out for being neither one thing nor the other," Kiona said quietly. "Not Apache enough, not white enough, too large to hide, too strange to keep." Marcus understood that kind of exile. He'd chosen his own, but the result was the same: a life lived in the margins, where belonging was memory instead of present tense. "The slavers found us 3 days after we left," Chenoa continued. "We fought. Kiona killed 1 with her bare hands before they got the chains on. I wish I had killed them both," Kiona said, and meant it. They finished eating in silence. Marcus collected the bowls, washed them in the basin. When he turned, both sisters were watching him with identical expressions, still wary, still ready to flee. But something had shifted. Some small gear had caught and held. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Marcus would wake before dawn, find the sisters already stirring, the fire already burning. Kiona would change Chenoa's bandage while Marcus prepared breakfast cornmeal mush, fried salt pork, coffee so strong it could strip rust. They'd eat together, then Marcus would attend to his work while the sisters found their own tasks. Chenoa, trapped by her injured ankle, took over the household repairs Marcus had been ignoring for years. She mended his torn shirts with neat stitches, oiled his boots, sharpened his knives on a whetstone she found in the shed. Her hands were never idle. Kiona helped Marcus with the heavier work, splitting wood, hauling water, repairing the shed door that had hung crooked since winter. She worked with the same fierce competence she'd shown, field dressing the deer, and Marcus found himself adjusting his pace to match hers, working faster and more efficiently than he had in years. They didn't speak much, but Marcus noticed small things, how Kiona always positioned herself between him and Chenoa, protective even in safety. How Chenoa watched the tree line constantly, mapping threats that might not exist. How both sisters slept back to back on the floor, despite his continued offers of the bed, needing to know the other was there through touch. On the fourth day, Marcus found Kiona standing at the mantel, studying the faded blue ribbon and the wooden horse. She didn't touch them, just looked. "My daughter," Marcus said from the doorway. "Sarah. She was 6 when the fever took her. My wife, Catherine, died 3 days later. Same sickness." Kiona nodded slowly. "You keep them close. Seemed wrong to put them away. The Apache burn the possessions of the dead, so their spirits can move on." She glanced at him. "But sometimes the living need the dead close more than the dead need freedom." Marcus had no response to that. Kiona didn't seem to expect one. That evening, Chenoa stood without her crutch for the first time, testing her weight. The ankle held. She took 3 steps before sitting again, satisfied. Her smile when she looked at her sister was pure triumph. "Healing fast," Marcus observed. "Apache women heal fast," Chenoa said, "or die. There is no middle way." Later, after the sisters had settled by the fire, Marcus sat at the table with the wooden horse in his hands, turning it over and over. He hadn't touched it in 2 years. Hadn't allowed himself to feel its weight, its solidity, the memory of carving it during Catherine's pregnancy, while imagining the small hands that would someday hold it. Kiona watched him from across the room. "It hurts less," she said quietly, "but it does not stop hurting." "How do you know?" "Because we lost a brother, 2 years before our father left. He drowned in the river during spring melt. We were supposed to watch him." Her voice remained steady, factual. "The people said it was punishment for being born wrong, that we had killed him with our curse." Marcus set the horse back on the mantel. "People say cruel things when they need someone to blame. Yes, but knowing it is cruel does not make it hurt less." Chenoa spoke from the floor, her Apache soft and fluid. Kiona listened, then translated. "She says, you are kind to let us stay, that many men would have used us different after buying us. I didn't buy you to use you. I bought you to free you. And yet we are still here." Marcus met her eyes. "Is that a problem?" "No," Kiona said, "but Chenoa wonders when you will ask for payment, what form it will take." Understanding hit Marcus like cold water. These women had learned that kindness always had a price, that men who smiled often had the worst intentions, that freedom was usually just another word for a chain you couldn't see yet. "The only payment I want," Marcus said carefully, "is that you don't die in my house. Beyond that, you owe me nothing. You can leave whenever you want." Both sisters stared at him. Then Chenoa spoke in halting English. "And if we want to stay?" Marcus felt something crack in his chest, the same sensation he'd felt watching them in the wagon, that recognition of people fighting against the weight, trying to crush them. "Then stay," he said, "long as you want." Chenoa nodded once, satisfied. Then she closed her eyes, leaning against her sister, and within minutes both were asleep. Marcus sat awake long into the night, listening to their breathing, and realized his cabin no longer felt hollow. It felt full of something he'd thought he'd lost forever, the sound of other people alive and present, taking up space, refusing to disappear. Outside, wind moved through the pines like whispered conversation. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Brennan allowed himself to imagine tomorrow without flinching. 10 days after the sisters arrived, the first snow fell, wet, heavy flakes that turned the world into silence. Marcus woke to find Chenoa already outside, standing barefoot in the accumulation, face turned skyward, arms spread wide. Her ankle had healed enough for full weight, though she still favored it when she thought no one watched. Kiona stood in the doorway, coffee cup steaming in her hands. "First snow was sacred to our mother's people," she said. "Chenoa always greets it like this, like meeting an old friend." Marcus pulled on his boots. "She'll freeze. She will come in when she is ready." To interrupt would be an insult. So, Marcus waited, watching this giant woman commune with the weather, and wondered what it meant to hold traditions from a people who'd rejected you. When Chenoa finally returned, her hair was crusted white, and her smile was the first genuine one he'd seen from her. "Good snow," she announced. "Deep winter is coming." "How do you know?" Marcus asked. "The way it falls, how the wind moves through it." "Our grandmother taught us to read the weather like white men read books." She shook snow from her hair, sending droplets across the cabin floor. "This storm will last 3 days, then cold like iron. We will need more wood." She was right. By afternoon the snow fell so thick Marcus couldn't see the shed from the cabin door. They spent the day inside, and the forced proximity finally cracked the careful politeness they'd all been maintaining. It started when Marcus was cleaning his rifle, a Springfield model tree he'd carried since the war. Kiona watched from the table where she was stitching a tear in his coat, her needle moving with surgical precision. "You know weapons," she observed. "Had to. Army doesn't give you much choice about learning." "Which war?" "The one that mattered least and cost most, fought down in Arizona territory, then New Mexico. Mostly we chased people who didn't want to be found, and killed people who'd done nothing but refuse to leave their own land." Marcus ran an oiled cloth down the barrel. "Spent 3 years doing the government's dirty work before I realized I was the villain in someone else's story." Chenoa looked up from the knife she was sharpening. "You fought Apache, among others. Navajo, Hopi, anyone who the government decided was in the way of progress." He met her eyes. "I'm not proud of it, but you did it anyway. I was young and stupid and thought following orders was the same as doing right. By the time I learned something different, I'd already got blood on my hands that wouldn't wash off." Marcus set the rifle aside. "That's why I left. Came north, found this place. Tried to build something that wasn't about taking from people who had less." Kiona tied off her thread. "And then your family died anyway. So the universe punished you, despite your repentance." "Something like that. Our people would say you carried bad medicine. The death follows some men like shadow." She held up the mended coat. "But I do not believe in curses anymore. Only choices and consequences." Chenoa stood abruptly, her knife clattering on the table. She spoke rapid Apache, her voice tight with old anger. Kiona responded in the same language, softer but firm. The argument escalated until Chenoa threw up her hands and stalked to the window, staring out at the falling snow. "What did she say?" Marcus asked. "She said, you are like all white men, you take what you want, then feel sorry when it costs something. That buying us does not erase what your people did to ours." Marcus nodded slowly. "She's right." Both sisters turned to look at him. "I can't fix what I did in the war. I can't bring back the people I helped drive from their land. Can't erase the part I played in a system built on theft and murder." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "All I can do is try to be different now than I was then. But that doesn't balance any scales. Doesn't make me good, just makes me less bad than I was." Chenoa studied him for a long moment. Then she returned to the table, picked up her knife, and resumed sharpening. "At least you do not lie about it," she said quietly. The tension broke like fever. Kiona returned to her sewing. Marcus finished cleaning his rifle. Outside, the storm intensified, and inside, the three of them settled into a silence that felt less like truce and more like understanding. That evening Kiona asked, "How did they die? Your wife and daughter? You said fever, but what kind?" Marcus had avoided this story for 3 years, but something about the storm outside and the warmth inside made the words come easier. Typhoid. There was an outbreak at Fort Collins, contaminated well water. Catherine had taken Sarah to visit her sister at the fort. They were supposed to be gone 3 days. Instead, they brought the sickness home. He stared into the fire, seeing different flames from a different time. Sarah got it first. High fever, delirium. She'd cry out for me in the night, but I couldn't help her. Could only watch while she burned up from the inside. Catherine caught it trying to nurse her. By the time I got them into the wagon to take them to town for a real doctor, the road had frozen. Over from an early winter storm. We made it 5 miles before the wagon threw a wheel. His voice went flat, mechanical. I carried Sarah the rest of the way on foot while Catherine rode the horse. Took us 6 hours in the freezing cold. By the time we reached the doctor, Sarah was gone. Catherine died the next morning. Pneumonia on top of the typhoid. Her lungs just gave up. Kiona and Chenoa sat motionless, barely breathing. The doctor said if I'd brought them in earlier, maybe. If the road hadn't frozen, maybe. If I'd known the symptoms faster, recognized the danger sooner. Marcus shook his head. All those maybes, they're the worst part. The wondering if you could have changed it by being smarter or faster or more careful. Our brother drowned because we were playing instead of watching, Chenoa said. We have our own maybes. How old were you? 8. Kiona was 10. We were supposed to keep him from the river during the melt season. But there were new foals at the horse pen, and we wanted to see them. So we left him for just a few minutes. Her hands twisted together. When we returned, he was floating face down in the current. Our father pulled him out, tried to save him. But the river does not give back what it takes. The people said it was divine judgment, Kiona added, that we had killed him because we were unnatural, too big, too strange. They said the spirits were trying to tell our parents they should have left us in the desert when we were born large and wrong. Marcus felt rage kindle in his chest, the same rage he'd felt watching them chained in that wagon. Your people abandoned you because you didn't look like them? Because we looked too much like our father, Kiona corrected. White blood made visible. Every time they saw us, they saw invasion and occupation and all the ways their world was ending. We were living reminders of what they had lost, so they decided 2 girls deserved exile for the crime of existing. Not exile, Chenoa said. Encouragement to leave. Small cruelties that accumulate, food given last, turned away from ceremonies, whispers that followed us like flies. Until one day our mother told us it would be better for everyone if we found our own path. She did not say leave, but she did not say stay. Kiona picked up the story. We walked south toward Mexico, thinking maybe we could find our father's people. But we are too Apache for white towns, and too white for Apache bands. Nowhere wanted us. We survived by hunting, by moving at night, by becoming invisible despite our size. And then the slavers found you. They had dogs. We could hide from men, but not from dogs. Chenoa's yaw tightened. They thought we would be valuable, exotic. 2 giant Indian women would fetch high price from the right buyer. The one I killed was not the first to touch us wrong, Kiona said, her voice hard as winter ground. But he was the last. After that, they kept us chained always, even to relieve ourselves, even to sleep. Marcus understood now why they'd insisted on sleeping on the floor, why they startled at sudden movements, why Chenoa kept that knife within reach even when cooking. Chains left marks deeper than skin. "You could have run," he said. "After I freed you, could have disappeared into the desert." "We thought about it," Kiona admitted. "That first night, while you slept. We could have taken food, supplies, been gone before dawn." "Why didn't you?" The sisters exchanged one of their wordless looks. Then Chenoa answered, "Because you did not look at us like we were things. You looked at us like we were people who had been treated like things. There is a difference. Outside, the wind howled like something dying. Inside, the fire crackled its response." Marcus added another log, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny stars returning to their origins. "Teach me," Kiona said suddenly. "Teach you what?" "To shoot, your rifle. If we stay here, if winter traps us, if men come, looking, I want to know how to kill them from a distance." Marcus considered this. A year ago, he might have refused, might have said it was too dangerous, that he didn't want that responsibility. But these women had already killed to survive, and pretending they needed protection from violence was insulting their intelligence. "Tomorrow," he said, "when the storm breaks, I'll teach you both." The next 2 days passed in the enforced intimacy of people trapped indoors by weather. They cooked together, Chenoa teaching Marcus how to make Apache-style bread in the Dutch oven, the flatbread coming out crisp and perfect. Kiona showed him how to tan deer hide using brains and smoke, a process that made the leather soft as cloth. Marcus taught them basic carpentry, how to measure twice and cut once, how to read wood grain to know where it would split. Small moments of humor emerged like flowers through snow. Chenoa laughed, actually laughed, when Marcus tried to pronounce an Apache word, and managed to say something that apparently meant confused dog instead of thank you. Kiona smiled when Marcus told a story about a sergeant in his unit who'd been terrified of chickens, had once jumped into a river to escape an angry hen. "You are less ghost-like when you laugh," Chenoa observed. "So are you," Marcus replied. On the third day, the storm broke just as Chenoa had predicted. The world lay buried under 2 feet of pristine white, and the sky was that particular blue that only comes after serious snow, clear and hard and cold enough to hurt. Marcus took both sisters to a clearing a 1/4 mile from the cabin. He'd brought the Springfield and 50 rounds of ammunition. "First rule," he said, "is respect the weapon. It's not a tool, it's a responsibility. Every bullet that leaves this barrel carries your intention with it. You don't shoot unless you're willing to live with where it lands." He showed them how to load, how to brace against recoil, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull. Kiona learned fast, her hands steady, her eye good. By the 20th shot, she was hitting the target more often than missing. Chenoa struggled. At first, her injured ankle affected her balance, but her determination was absolute. She stood in the snow for 2 hours, firing until her shoulder was bruised and her hands shook until she could hit the target 3 times out of 5. "Good," Marcus said finally. "Tomorrow we'll work on moving targets. Walking back," Chenoa said. "If slavers come, or soldiers, or anyone, we fight." It wasn't a question. "We fight," Marcus agreed. That evening, while they were preparing dinner, they heard a horse approaching. Marcus grabbed the rifle. The sisters moved to opposite sides of the cabin, flanking the door, a tactical positioning that came from instinct, not instruction. The rider was Mrs. Haberley, the old woman from town who'd brought the preserved peaches. She sat her horse like someone born to saddle, wrapped in many layers. She looked twice her actual size. "Marcus Brennan," she called out. "I'm coming in peaceful." Marcus opened the door. "Mrs. Haberley." She dismounted stiffly, tied her horse, and stamped snow from her boots. When she entered, her eyes swept the cabin, taking in the two Apache women, the domestic scene, the obvious cohabitation. "So it's true," she said. "You kept them. They chose to stay. That's not how the town's hearing it. Story going around is, you've got yourself 2 Indian wives. Other story is you're hiding fugitives. Another says you've gone soft in the head from living alone too long." "People talk," Marcus said. "Let them." Mrs. Haberley pulled out a cloth bundle, brought bread, and a warning. "There's men in Copper Bend asking about 3 people matching your description, 2 tall Indian women and a big white man. They're offering money for information." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "Who are they?" "Don't know. But they have that look, the kind that tracks things for living. Bounty hunters, maybe, or slavers looking to reclaim lost property." She glanced at Kiona and Chenoa. "You girls got prices on your heads?" "We were sold legal," Kiona said, "then bought legal. We owe no one. Legal ain't the same as right, and right ain't the same as safe." Mrs. Haberley moved toward the door. "I'm telling you because I watched my own daughter get taken by slavers 15 years back, never saw her again. So I know what it looks like when people need warning." "Thank you," Marcus said. "Don't thank me. Just don't be stupid. Winter will protect you for a while, but spring comes eventually, and when it does, those men will come looking." She opened the door, paused. "One more thing. Not everyone in town thinks like Carver. Some of us remember when white folks needed help from Indians to survive out here. Some of us think maybe we still do." After she left, the cabin felt smaller, more vulnerable. Chenoa moved to the window, watching the tree line. Kiona checked the load on the rifle Marcus had taught her to shoot. "We should leave," Chenoa said, "before we bring death to your door." "No," Marcus said flatly. "We prepare, we watch, but we don't run unless there's no other choice." "Why?" Kiona asked. "Why risk everything for us?" Marcus looked at these 2 women, fierce, capable, refusing to be diminished by a world that insisted they were wrong. He thought of his daughter, of his wife, of everyone he'd failed to save. And he thought of the man he'd been in the war, taking orders to hunt people whose only crime was existing in the wrong place. "Because running is what I did before," he said. "Ran from what I'd done in the war, ran from the world after my family died, ran so far into these mountains, I almost forgot I was human." He met their eyes. "I'm done running. This is my home. And if you're here, it's your home too. Nobody takes you from here without going through me." Kiona crossed the room and placed her hand on his shoulder the first time either sister had voluntarily touched him. "Then we stand," she said. "Together," Chenoa added. Outside, night fell fast and complete. Inside, Marcus checked his ammunition, inventoried his supplies, and began planning for a war that might never come but probably would. The sisters sat by the fire, speaking quietly in Apache, and Marcus realized the choice had been made, not just by him, not just by them, but by all 3 together. They were no longer rescuer and rescued, no longer stranger and stranger. They were something new, something unnamed, something that would have to be forged in whatever fire was coming. And when it came, they would face it standing side by side. The riders came on the 8th day after Mrs. Tevens. Haberley's warning, emerging from the tree line like frost, crawling across glass, slow, inevitable, patient. Marcus spotted them from the ridge where he was cutting deadfall. 5 dark shapes moving through snow that reached their horses' bellies. They weren't hurrying, didn't need to. They knew he'd seen them, knew he had nowhere to run. He left the wood where it fell and moved down the slope toward the cabin, long strides, eating distance. Kiona was splitting kindling when he appeared, and she read his face before he spoke. "How many?" she asked, axe still in hand. 5. Maybe 20 minutes out. She buried the axe in the chopping block and moved inside. Chenoa was grinding corn for evening meal, but she stood immediately when her sister entered, the pestle forgotten. Marcus followed, already calculating ammunition count, sightlines from the cabin, how long they could hold if it came to siege. "Get the rifle," he told Kiona, "and the shotgun from under the bed. Load both. Chenoa, bar the back window. If shooting starts, you go out through it and run north. There's a cave 2 miles up." "No," Chenoa said flatly. "This isn't negotiable." "You are correct. It is not." She moved to the front window, peered through. The gap in the shutters. "We stay. We fight. This is what we agreed." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to force them to understand that his death meant nothing while theirs meant everything. But he saw the set of their jaws, the way they'd positioned themselves to control both windows and the door. They'd already made their choice, and respecting that choice was part of what made them equals rather than property. "Fine," he said, "but nobody fires unless I give the word. We try talking first." Kiona handed him the Springfield, kept the shotgun for herself. "And if talking fails, then we make them regret the long ride." The riders stopped 50 yards from the cabin, staying mounted, staying spread out in a loose semicircle that prevented easy targeting. Professional formation, men who'd done this before. The one in the center was older than the others, maybe 50, with a face like weathered saddle leather and eyes that calculated distance and risk with the dispassion of someone who viewed violence as mathematics. "Marcus Brennan," the man called out. "I'm Dalton Hayes, United States Marshal out of Santa Fe, here on official business." Marcus stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. Behind him, he felt rather than saw. Kiona moved to the window, the shotgun pointed through a crack in the shutters. "Long way from Santa Fe. Must be important business." "Important enough." Hayes walked his horse forward 3 steps, hands visible on the saddle horn. "You're harboring 2 Apache women wanted on suspicion of murder. I'm here to remand them to territorial custody." "Murder of who?" "2 men named Carver and Sills. Found dead near the Gila River 3 weeks back. Throats cut. Witnesses placed 2 large Indian women at the scene." Hayes's expression didn't change. "Now, I'm not saying these are the same women, but I am saying I need to ask them some questions." Marcus kept his voice level. "The women here came from Copper Bend, where Carver sold them to me. Legal. Got witnesses who saw the transaction. So unless your dead men were alive after I bought these women, your timeline doesn't work." "Funny thing about that, Carver's partner, man name of Sills, says Carver never made it to Copper Bend. Says they were camped by the Gila when 2 Apache women they'd captured killed Carver and escaped." Hayes tilted his head. "Says he tracked them north and lost their trail, then hears about a big white man buying 2 Apache women in Copper Bend. Quite a coincidence. Or quite a lie. Man who sells people for a living might not be a reliable witness." "That's for a judge to decide. Not you. Not me." Hayes shifted in his saddle. "I got a warrant signed by Judge Holbrook. Legal and proper. You can read it if you like. But those women need to come with me to answer questions. If they're innocent, Judge will let them go." Behind Marcus, he heard Kiona chamber around, the sound carried in the cold air like a bell tolling. Hayes heard it too, his men tensed, hands drifting toward weapons. But the marshal just smiled, thin and cold. "Don't be stupid, Brennan. You shoot a federal marshal, you hang. And your Apache friends die anyway. Only question is how many of my men you take with you." "I count 5, Marcus said. "Odds aren't bad as you think. You're a veteran, Army by the look of you, so you know how this works. We got you surrounded, got legal authority, got a job to do. You making this hard just means more people die for nothing." Marcus considered his options. Hayes was right about one thing. Killing lawmen, even corrupt ones, would paint them as outlaws beyond redemption. But letting them take Kiona and Chenoa meant a rigged trial and a quick hanging because dead Apache women couldn't testify about what slavers had actually done. "Let me talk to them," Marcus said. "Give me 5 minutes." Hayes checked a pocket watch. 5 minutes. "Then I'm coming in." Marcus backed into the cabin. The sisters stood ready, Chenoa with her knife, Kiona with the shotgun. Their faces held no fear, only a grim acceptance that this moment had been inevitable since the day they'd been born wrong. "They're lying," Kiona said immediately. "We killed no one at the Gila. We were already 3 days north when Carver found us." "I believe you, but Hayes doesn't care about the truth. He cares about closing a case that makes him look bad." Marcus moved to the window, assessed angles. "Sills probably killed his own partner for the money, blamed you because dead Indian women can't defend themselves." "Then we fight," Chenoa said. "If we fight, we die. All of us. Hayes brought 4 deputies. We might get 2, maybe 3, but they'll burn us out or wait us out, and eventually we'll run out of ammunition or water or luck. So you want us to surrender?" Kiona's voice was sharp. "Let them hang us for crimes we did not commit." "No, I want you to trust me." Marcus set down the rifle. "I'm going out there, going to make Hayes an offer." "What offer?" "Me as collateral. If Hayes takes me to Santa Fe while you stay here, I'll testify to the timeline. Prove you couldn't have killed Carver. Judge will have to release me, and your names get cleared." Both sisters stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. "That is stupid plan," Chenoa said. "It's the only plan that doesn't end with all of us dead. It ends with you dead." Kiona stepped forward. "You think this marshal will let you testify? He will kill you on the road. Claim you tried to escape, bury you where no one finds the body. Maybe, but maybe not. Hayes is career lawman. He didn't get that old by killing witnesses where other deputies can see." Marcus reached for the door. "Either way, it keeps you two alive. That's what matters." Chenoa moved between him and the door, 6'6" of muscle and fury. "No, we did not survive chains and slavery and exile, so a white man could sacrifice himself for our honor. We are not worth that. You're worth more than that. You're worth everything." Marcus met her eyes. "When Catherine and Sarah died, I thought my life was over, thought I'd used up all my purpose. But then I saw you two in that wagon, and I knew I still had one thing left to do, one chance to save someone who mattered. Don't take that from me." Kiona's hand found her sister's arm. They spoke in Apache, fast and urgent. Then Kiona turned to Marcus. "If you walk out that door, we walk with you. All 3 go to Santa Fe. All 3 testify. They'll hang you before trial. Then we die together. That is better than living while you die for us." The clock on the mantel, Catherine's clock, the one that had stopped the day she died, chose that moment to chime, impossible but real. All 3 of them looked at it. The hands showed 3:05, though Marcus knew he hadn't wound it in years. "Your wife agrees," Chenoa said softly. "We stay together." Before Marcus could argue, Hayes's voice carried from outside. "Time's up, Brennan. What's it going to be?" Marcus opened the door. Hayes and his men had dismounted, spread out in a firing line. Professional, prepared, deadly. "Here's my offer," Marcus called. "You want to take someone to Santa Fe? Take me. I'll testify about the timeline, about Carver selling these women in Copper Bend. Let a judge sort it out proper. Women stay here." Hayes actually laughed. "That's not how warrants work. I got names, Indian names, which admittedly I can't pronounce, but the descriptions match. 2 tall Apache women. You got 2 tall Apache women. I take them. Then you take all 3 of us, because they don't go anywhere without me. That's not your decision. Like hell it isn't. This is my property, my home. These are my guests. And if you want them, you go through me." Hayes sighed like a teacher disappointed with a slow student. "I really hoped you'd be reasonable about this." He nodded to his deputies. 2 of them started forward. The shotgun blast from the correct window made them freeze. Kiona had fired into the air, but the message was clear. "Next one takes your men in the chest," she called out. "You want to test if I miss?" Hayes's hand moved toward his pistol. Marcus raised Springfield. From the cabin, Chenoa appeared in the doorway with the hunting rifle Marcus had forgotten about, the one he'd inherited from the previous owner and never used. Somehow she'd found it, loaded it, and now it pointed steady at Hayes's center mass. Standoff. 5 lawmen against 3 defenders who had nothing left to lose. "How do you want it to end?" Hayes asked. "In blood and stupidity? This is how it ends if you don't leave," Marcus said. "We didn't kill anyone. We're not fugitives. You got a warrant based on a slaver's lies, and you're using federal authority to finish what Carver started. That's not justice. That's murder wearing a badge." Big words from a man in no position to back them up. "I count 5 of you. We got 3 shooters, 3 angles, and the only question is which of your men die first. You willing to sacrifice 2, maybe 3 deputies to arrest women who'll just testify you had no case?" Marcus's voice hardened. "Because I'm willing to die right here. Today. And I think they are too. Question is, are you?" Silence stretched like wire under tension. Hayes stared at Marcus, then at the cabin, calculating costs versus benefits. Whatever he saw in their faces made him recalculate. "You're making a mistake," Hayes said finally. "Probably. But it's my mistake to make." Hayes remounted slowly, deliberately, making sure no one mistook the movement for aggression. His deputies followed his lead, but their faces promised this wasn't over. "I'll be filing a report," Hayes said, "about obstruction, about harboring fugitives. Judge Holbrook won't like it. Let him not like it from Santa Fe." Hayes turned his horse. "Winter's almost over, Brennan. When spring comes, I'll be back. With more men, more authority. And next time, we won't talk first." They rode out, 5 shapes dissolving into the forest's shadows. Marcus stood on the porch until he couldn't hear their horses anymore, until the forest had swallowed them completely. Then his legs went weak, and he sat down hard on the steps. Kiona and Chenoa emerged from the cabin. Chenoa sat on one side of him, Kiona on the other. For a long time, none of them spoke. "You would have fought for us," Chenoa finally said. "Not a question. Would have died for us," Kiona added. Marcus nodded. "Yes. Why? We are nothing to you. Strangers you bought on impulse. You stopped being strangers the moment you walked into my home. The moment you showed me it was possible to keep living after everything else dies." Marcus looked at both of them. "I lost my family. But maybe I get to have a different kind of family. If you'll let me." Chenoa's hand found his, squeezed once. Her palm was calloused, strong, warm against his cold fingers. Kiona leaned her shoulder against his, a weight that felt like anchor and promise both. "Family?" Chenoa repeated, testing the word. "Yes. This is good word for what we are." They sat like that while the sun dropped toward the horizon. 3 people who'd been alone too long and now weren't. 3 people who'd found in each other not rescue or debt, but something rarer, mutual choosing. The kind of family forged, not by blood, but by standing together when running would have been easier. That night, after a quiet meal, Kiona asked Marcus to teach them to read. "If we are going to live in your world, we should know its language fully. Written as well as spoken." So Marcus pulled out Catherine's books, the ones she'd treasured, the ones he couldn't bear to open after she died. Poetry by Whitman, essays by Emerson, a worn Bible with her notes in the margins. And he began teaching them letters, teaching them words, teaching them the architecture of English sentence structure. Chenoa learned faster than Kiona, her mind quick with patterns, but both worked with the same fierce determination they brought to everything else. When Chenoa successfully read her first complete sentence, "The snow falls soft on pine trees," She looked up with wonder, like she'd discovered magic. "This is power," she said. "Words that live after the speaker dies. Words that travel farther than feet can walk." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "That's exactly what it is." Later, when the fire had burned to embers and exhaustion pulled at all of them, Chenoa fell asleep with her head against Kiona's shoulder. Marcus sat in his chair, watching them breathe in the firelight. Kiona's eyes were open, reflecting flames. "You are afraid," she said quietly. "Yes. Of Hayes returning, of losing this, of losing you. Both of you." Marcus's voice roughened. "I've lost everyone I cared about. And now I care again, and that terrifies me more than any marshal with a warrant." Kiona reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "In the darkness, we are Apache women. We do not die easily, and we do not leave what is ours." She squeezed his hand. "You are ours now, Marcus Brennan, like we are yours. That is not debt. That is not gratitude. That is a choice." "Choice," Marcus repeated. "Every morning we wake here, we choose again. And every morning we will choose the same, until there are no more mornings." She smiled, small and fierce. "But there will be many mornings. I have seen this in my dreams. The three of us, grown old together, fighting over who gets to sit closest to fire." Marcus felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. He'd thought his capacity for hope had died with Catherine and Sarah, but here it was again, stubborn and fragile and impossibly alive. "I'd like that," he whispered. "Then it will be so." Outside, wind moved through the pines like breath through lungs. Inside, three people who'd been broken separately began to imagine what they might build together. And somewhere in Santa Fe, a marshal filed his report and began planning his return, not knowing that what he'd face in spring wouldn't be three isolated people, but something far more dangerous, a family with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctant as a miser releasing gold. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing dead grass and frozen earth, and with the thaw came a restlessness that infected all three of them. They'd spent 4 months in the cabin's tight orbit, eating, working, learning, existing in a bubble that felt suspended outside time. But time had continued anyway, and now spring crept closer with all its promises and threats. Marcus woke one March morning to find both sisters already outside, examining the southern clearing where sunlight had melted the snow down to bare soil. Chenoa knelt, pressing her palm flat against the ground, while Kiona paced the perimeter, measuring distances with her stride. "Garden," Chenoa announced when Marcus approached. "Here. We plant here. Ground still frozen underneath. 2 weeks it thaws. Then we plant." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Corn, beans, squash. The 3 sisters, our people call them. They grow together, protect each other. Like us." Marcus looked at the clearing, trying to see it through their eyes, not just dirt and dead grass, but possibility. A garden meant permanence, meant planning for harvest. Meant believing they'd still be here when summer turned the corn tall and heavy. "We'll need to clear the rocks," he said. "Build a fence to keep deer out, maybe a scarecrow." Kiona smiled. "You say yes, then immediately list problems. This is a very white man's way of thinking. Someone has to be practical, and someone has to believe things will grow." Chenoa walked to where Marcus stood, placed both hands on his shoulders. At her full height, she looked down at him despite his own size. "We are planting this garden, Marcus Brennan. We are saying, to the earth and sky and any man who watches, we are staying. This is our home. These seeds are our promise." Her certainty was infectious, Marcus nodded. "Then we'll need seeds. I'll ride to Copper Bend tomorrow." "No," Kiona said sharply. "You do not go to town anymore. Too dangerous. Hayes has spies. People who watch and report." She crossed her arms. "We need a new plan. Someone else gets supplies. As if summoned by the conversation, a wagon appeared on the eastern trail. Marcus's hand moved toward his rifle before he recognized the driver, Mrs. Haberley, moving with the determined slowness of someone who refused to let age dictate capability. She stopped the wagon near the cabin and climbed down with theatrical groaning. Lord preserve me, that road gets rougher every year, like riding a washboard through hell. Mrs. Haberley, Marcus greeted, wasn't expecting company. Nobody expects me. That's how I stay useful. She pulled a crate from the wagon bed, brought supplies, flour, salt, coffee, and these. She lifted a burlap sack, seeds, corn, beans, squash, pumpkin, everything you'd need for a proper garden. The three of them stared at her. How did you know? Marcus began. Because I'm old, not blind. Saw your Apache girls looking at the clearing last time I rode past, recognized that look. Used to have it myself, back when I was young and foolish enough to believe in tomorrows. She handed the sack to Chenoa. Plant them proper, not too deep, not too shallow, and talk to them while they grow. Plants listen better than most people. Chenoa took the seeds with something like reverence. Why are you help us? Because Hayes came through Copper Bend last week. Asked a lot of questions, offered money for information. Mrs. Haberley's expression hardened. Some folks took it, told him about your daily routines, when Marcus goes hunting, how you all move together. Hayes is building a map of your life, and when spring fully breaks, he's coming back. How many? Men? Marcus asked. Dozen, maybe more. He's calling it a fugitive recovery operation. Got authorization from the territorial governor. Says you're harboring murderers and obstructing justice. She shook her head. Half the town thinks he's right, other half thinks he's a bastard doing dirty work for slavers. But thinking don't stop bullets. Kiona and Chenoa exchanged glances. Marcus felt the weight of inevitability settling over them like early frost. We can run, he said. Head north into Canada. Start over where territorial law doesn't reach. No, both sisters said simultaneously. We run, we spend our lives running, Kiona continued. Every town, every territory, always looking behind, always afraid. That is not life. That is just slow death with walking. Mrs. Haberley nodded approvingly. Smart girls. Running just means dying tired. She pulled another item from the wagon, a rifle, newer than Marcus's Springfield, with a scope mounted on top. This is from my husband's collection. He's been dead 15 years, doesn't need it anymore. You do. Marcus took the weapon, checked the action. Quality piece. Expensive. I can't accept this. You can, and you will. Because I'm not asking. She moved back to her wagon. One more thing. There's a man in town, Wheeler. He's a drunk and a coward, but he's also the telegraph operator. He owes me money from a poker game. Said he'd send word when Hayes moves north, give you maybe a day's warning. Why? Chenoa asked. Why risk yourself for us? Mrs. Haberley was quiet for a moment. I told you about my daughter. What I didn't tell you is that she was pregnant when they took her. My grandchild was born in chains somewhere, probably dead now. Probably never even knew they had a grandmother who loved them. Her voice cracked like old leather. I can't save my daughter. Can't save my grandchild, but maybe I can help save you. Maybe that balances some small part of the ledger. She climbed into the wagon and left before any of them could find words adequate to her gift. That afternoon, they began preparing in earnest. Marcus taught them everything he knew about defensive positions, how to create crossfire zones, where to stack supplies for quick access, which trees offered the best cover. They reinforced the cabin's shutters with extra planking, cut firing ports at strategic angles, stockpiled water and ammunition. But they also planted the garden. Chenoa insisted on it, despite the tactical irresponsibility of spending hours exposed in the clearing. We prepare for death, she said, but we also prepare for life. Both are necessary. So they worked the soil, breaking the frost-hardened crust, pulling rocks, mixing in composted leaves from the forest floor. Chenoa sang while she worked Apache songs that Marcus didn't understand, but felt in his chest anyway, rhythms older than borders, or wars, or the cruel invention of property. Kiona planted each seed with ceremony, pressing it into the earth, while speaking soft words in her mother's language. When Marcus asked what she was saying, she translated, "I am asking the seed to be brave, to trust the darkness of soil, to believe that breaking open is not death, but transformation. Your people have a poet's soul," Marcus observed. "All people have poet's soul. Most just forget how to listen to it." As they worked, Kiona told stories about her grandmother, a medicine woman who'd learned healing from dreams, who could find water by listening to the earth, who'd once set a broken leg using only rawhide and prayer. "She died when I was 12, Kiona said. "The elders said her power died with her, but she taught me first, taught me how to read signs, how to know when danger comes." "What signs do you see now?" Marcus asked. "Ravens circling at dawn. 3 mornings in a row. That means blood is coming." She pressed another seed into the earth. "But I also see green shoots under dead grass. That means life is stronger than death. Both signs are true. We live in the space between them." Over the following weeks, they fell into new rhythms. Mornings were for combat training, Marcus, teaching them not just shooting but tactics, how to move as a unit, how to communicate without words, how to turn terrain into advantage. Chenoa proved frighteningly good at hand-to-hand fighting, her size and strength making her dangerous at close range. Kiona excelled at patience, at waiting for the perfect shot, at reading situations 3 moves ahead. Afternoons were for building. They constructed a root cellar, dug deep and lined with stone, where they could hide or make a last stand if the cabin fell. They created caches in the forest weapons, food, supplies buried in waterproof containers at coordinates only they knew. Marcus showed them how to navigate by stars, how to identify edible plants, how to move through forest without leaving tracks. Evenings were for culture. Chenoa taught Marcus to speak Apache not fluently, but enough to understand the bone-deep poetry in her language, words that had no English equivalent. Words like Niduljuhi, a concept that meant something like returning to wholeness through community, but couldn't be cleanly translated. Kiona taught him Apache history, not the version told in white man's books, but the true history of displacement and resistance and survival against machinery designed to erase them. In return, Marcus shared his own stories, about his grandfather who'd fled Ireland during the famine, about building a life in a country that viewed you as both labor and threat, about Catherine and her quiet strength, how she'd taught herself to read Latin just to prove a priest wrong who said women couldn't handle theology, about Sarah and her fierce curiosity, how she demanded to know why the sky was blue and wasn't satisfied until Marcus had found a book that explained light refraction in terms a 6-year-old could grasp. "She would have liked you both," Marcus said one evening. "Catherine would have appreciated your strength. Sarah would have climbed on your shoulders and demanded you take her exploring. We would have carried her gladly," Chenoa said. "And your Catherine, we would have been friends, I think. Women who refuse to be small understand each other." The garden grew. Tiny green shoots emerged from the soil, like promises being kept. The sisters tended it obsessively, pulling weeds, adjusting the fence, speaking encouragement to plants that probably didn't care, but seemed to thrive anyway. Marcus watched them work and realized they weren't just growing food, they were growing faith that there would be a future to harvest it. One evening in early April, Marcus found Kiona on the porch, staring at the sunset with unusual intensity. He sat beside her, waiting. "I am afraid," she said finally, "of haze, of this, of happiness, of wanting things." She gestured at the cabin, the garden, the life they'd built. "For so long, Chenoa, and I wanted nothing because wanting to hurt too much. We learn to expect nothing, need nothing, hope for nothing, just survive, just breathe, just continue. She looked at him. But now I want this to last. I want to harvest that garden. I want to grow old here. I want... Her voice caught. I want so many things, and that terrifies me. Because wanting means you can lose. Marcus understood completely. After Catherine and Sarah died, I spent 2 years wanting nothing. It felt safer, simpler. If you don't want, you can't be disappointed, can't be destroyed. What changed? You, both of you. You showed me that the alternative to wanting is existing, and existing isn't living. He met her eyes. I'd rather want and lose than never want at all. Even if losing breaks you again, even then, because the breaking means something mattered, and mattering is all we've got. Kiona leaned against his shoulder, her weight familiar now, comfortable. When Hayes comes, we'll face him, together. And maybe we win, maybe we don't. But we face it as family. Family, she repeated and smiled. Yes, this is the right word. Inside, Chenoa was cooking dinner venison stew with wild onions and the first tender dandelion greens of spring. The cabin smelled of home in ways it hadn't since Catherine died. Marcus and Kiona entered together, and Chenoa looked up from the pot with an expression of contentment so profound it hurt to witness. Tomorrow, she announced, we will make a sweat lodge. Small one, behind the cabin. Our people use them for purification before battle. We should prepare our spirits as well as our bodies. I don't know the ceremonies, Marcus said. We will teach you. It is not complicated. You sit in heat, you sweat, you speak the truth, you become ready for what comes. She stirred the stew. Also, it feels very good. Cleans the skin, clears the mind. So the next day they built a small sweat lodge, saplings bent into a dome, covered with canvas and earth. They heated stones in the fire pit until they glowed red, carried them inside, poured water to create steam that filled the small space like dense fog. Sitting in the suffocating heat, stripped to essentials, Marcus felt years of grief sweating out of his pores. Chenoa sang, Kiona prayed in Apache. And Marcus finally let himself cry for everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. When they emerged, skin pink and raw, the world looked different, cleaner, more real, like a veil had been lifted. Now we are ready, Chenoa said. Whatever comes, we are ready. But that night, Marcus woke to find both sisters sitting up, alert as hunting cats. Kiona held a finger to her lips. In the distance, so faint he almost missed it, horses, moving slow, trying to be quiet. They dressed silently, grabbed weapons, moved to positions they'd practiced 100 times, Marcus at the front window, Kiona at the side, Chenoa covering the back with the hunting rifle, but the horses passed without stopping, heading north toward the ridge. Just travelers, or scouts, mapping their defenses. Either way, a reminder that the bubble was thinning, that the world was closing in. Soon, Kiona whispered. Marcus nodded. Soon. They didn't return to bed. Just sat together in the darkness, weapons close, watching the forest for shadows that moved wrong. And in the garden outside, tiny corn stalks pushed toward the sky, racing against time to become something strong enough to harvest. The seeds were growing. The question was whether they'd live long enough to see what they became. The telegraph arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April, delivered by Wheeler himself, a reed-thin man who smelled of whiskey and desperation. He rode hard enough that his horse's flanks were lathered white, pulled up at the cabin's edge without dismounting. Hayes left Santa Fe 4 days ago, he gasped. 15 men, federal marshals and hired guns. They're moving slow, picking up. Locals who want the bounty. Could be 20 by the time they reach you. He thrust a piece of paper toward Marcus. Mrs. Haberley said to give you this. His voice cracked. She's dead, Hart gave out 2 days back, but she made me promise. Made me swear on my mother's grave I'd warn you. Marcus took the paper, Mrs. Haberley's handwriting shaky but determined. Don't let them take your girls. Some things are worth dying for. I should know I died slow for 30 years after losing mine. Better to die fast, protecting what matters. Wheeler turned his horse. They'll be here by tomorrow evening, maybe sooner if they push hard. I've done what I promised. My debt is paid. He rode off before Marcus could respond, disappearing into the forest like smoke. Inside the cabin, Marcus spread a hand-drawn map across the table. Kiona and Chenoa studied it with the focus of generals planning a campaign. They'll come from the south, Marcus said. Main trail. But Hayes is smart, he'll send. Flankers east and west to cut off escape routes. We don't plan to escape, Chenoa said. I know, but we need to think like they do. He marked positions on the map. If they're smart, they'll try to surround us, wait us out. If they're arrogant, they'll try to rush the cabin. Hayes is smart, Kiona said. But the men he hired are not. They think we are just 2 Indian women and 1 old man. They will be confident. Confidence makes mistakes. Marcus looked at both of them, these women who'd transformed from chained captives to warriors over the course of a winter. This is the last chance to run. We could be 10 miles north before they arrive. Live to fight another day. No, they said in unison. This is our home, Chenoa continued. We have planted seeds here. We have made oaths to this ground. If we run now, we are saying none of it mattered. That we are still fugitives, still hunted, still less than human. She picked up her rifle. I am done being less than human. They spent the day in final preparations. Marcus climbed onto the cabin roof, created a sniper's nest behind the chimney with clear sightlines to all approaches. Chenoa fortified the root cellar, stocking it with water, ammunition, and medical supplies in case they needed to fall back. Kiona set traps along the southern trail, nothing lethal, just obstacles designed to slow and frustrate. Tripwires connected to bells, deadfalls that would spook horses, false paths that led to dense thorn bush. As the sun began its descent, they gathered in the cabin for what might be their last meal together. Chenoa had made fry bread, and they ate it with honey and the last of their preserved berries. Nobody spoke about tomorrow. Instead, they talked about small things, how the corn was growing faster than expected, how Marcus needed to patch the shed roof before summer rains, how Kiona wanted to learn to make soap the way Catherine used to. Domestic dreams for people preparing for war. That night, they took turns to watch. Marcus had the midnight shift, and he sat on the porch with his rifle, listening to the forest speak its ancient language. Owls called. Small creatures rustled through undergrowth. The wind carried a pine scent and the promise of rain. He thought about Mrs. Haberley, dead now, her final act a warning that might save them or might be futile. He thought about Catherine and Sarah, buried 20 miles south under wooden crosses that were probably rotted by now. He thought about the man he'd been in the war, following orders, killing efficiently, telling himself it was duty instead of murder. And he thought about the man he'd become over this winter, someone who'd remembered what it meant to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than take, to choose love over isolation, even when isolation felt safer. If tomorrow was his last day, at least he'd die as someone his daughter might have been proud of. Dawn came pale and cold, mist rising from the ground like the earth breathing out ghosts. They were in position by the time the sun cleared the ridge, Marcus on the roof, Kiona at the front window, Chenoa covering the eastern approach from the tree line. 3 points of a triangle, each able to support the others. The morning stretched, birds sang, the mist burned off. Spring asserted itself through tiny wildflowers and the insistent green of new growth. The garden's corn stood 6 inches tall now, fragile but determined. They came at noon. 23 riders, moving in formation, Hayes at the center, looking even more weathered than before. But there was something else, a wagon behind the main group, and in it, shapes that made Marcus's blood run cold. Prisoners. 4 of them. He recognized one through the rifle scope. Tom Brennan, the baker from Copper Bend, no relation despite the shared name. An old man who'd always been kind, who'd given Sarah cookies when Catherine brought her to town. Hayes had brought hostages. The column stopped 200 yards out. Hayes rode forward alone, white flag tied to his rifle barrel. Marcus climbed down from the roof, met him at the clearing's edge, with his own rifle held loosely. "Didn't expect the flag," Marcus said. "Didn't expect you to still be here. Thought you'd have run by now." Hayes looked past him at the cabin, at the garden, at the signs of people committed to staying. "You've made this harder than it needs to be. It was always going to be hard. You're here for innocent women. That's hard by definition." Hayes gestured to the wagon. "Those 4 people are from Copper Bend. Good people, families. I'm holding them as insurance. You attack us, they die. You surrender the women peacefully, they go free." Marcus felt rage build behind his ribs like steam pressure. "You're threatening civilians now? That's your justice? That's my leverage. You care about innocent people? Prove it. Give me the Apache women and these folks get to see their families again." Hayes's expression hardened. "You've got 1 hour to decide. After that I start executing hostages, 1 every 15 minutes until you comply." He rode back before Marcus could respond. Inside the cabin, Marcus explained the situation. Kiona's face went blank with the kind of fury that burns cold instead of hot. Chenoa simply loaded more ammunition, her movements mechanical. "He thinks we will trade ourselves for strangers," Chenoa said. "He thinks we are noble savages who will sacrifice for white people who never protected us." "He's betting on my conscience," Marcus corrected. "On me not being able to watch innocent people die." "Can you?" Kiona asked. Not judgment, just question. Marcus thought of Tom Brennan, who'd lost his wife to cholera, who baked bread every morning, even though most days he barely broke even, who'd told Sarah stories about talking animals while Catherine shopped. Good man, innocent man, about to die because Hayes needed leverage. "No," Marcus admitted. "I can't." "Then we attack," Chenoa said. "Before the hour ends, before he kills anyone. Against 23 men? That's suicide. Maybe, but sitting here while he murders hostages is also death, just slower, more shameful." Chenoa moved to the window, assessed angles. "We have surprise, we have high ground, we have righteousness. Sometimes that is enough." Kiona placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "You said once that you were done running, that this was our home. Did you mean it?" "Yes." "Then we defend it. And if we die, protecting something real instead of running from shadows." She picked up the rifle Mrs. Haberley had given them. "But I do not plan to die. I plan to kill many men and then eat dinner in this cabin tonight." Marcus looked at both of them, these fierce, impossible women who'd taught him that surviving wasn't the same as living, that choosing to fight was sometimes choosing to be human instead of victim. "All right," he said, "but we're smart about it. Chenoa, you circle wide east. Get into the rocks overlooking their position. Kiona, you take the western tree line. I'll draw their attention from the front. We create crossfire. Target the men guarding the hostages first. Once the civilians are clear, we make them pay for every inch." "And Hayes?" Chenoa asked. "Hayes is mine." They moved into position during the 40-minute mark, using terrain they'd mapped over months, moving through forest they knew like the rooms of their own home. Marcus watched through his scope as Chenoa reached the eastern rocks, as Kiona melted into the western trees. To sisters who'd been told they were wrong their entire lives, now proving that being different meant being dangerous to those who underestimated them. At the 55-minute mark, Hayes dismounted. He pulled Tom Brennan from the wagon, forced him to his knees, drew his pistol, pressed it against the old man's head. "Last chance, Brennan," he shouted. "Send out the women, or this man dies." Marcus stood, stepped into the clearing, rifle slung across his back, hands visible and empty. Every one of Hayes's men tensed. 20 guns trained on Marcus's chest. "You want to kill someone?" Marcus called out. "Kill me. I'm the one who's been harboring them. I'm the one who refused your warrant." "Let the old man go." Hayes studied him across the distance. "Where are the women?" "Gone. Left this morning. Headed north into the high country where you'll never find them." "You're lying." "Maybe, but killing hostages won't prove it either way. You want justice? Take me. I'll stand trial for everything. Obstruction, harboring fugitives, whatever you want to charge me with. But you let these people go." Hayes seemed to consider this. Then he smiled, thin, cold, victorious. "Here's the problem with your offer. I don't believe you, and I don't need you." He cocked the pistol. "I just need an example." The gunshot cracked across the clearing, but it wasn't Hayes's gun that fired. Kiona's bullet took the marshal in the praise shoulder, spinning him sideways, the pistol flying from his hand. Before his men could react, Chenoa opened fire from the eastern rocks, dropping 2 of the guards near the wagon. Marcus sprinted forward, drawing his sidearm, shooting as he ran. Chaos erupted. Hayes's men scattered, some diving for cover, some returning fire blindly. But they were in the open, exposed, while Marcus and the sisters had prepared this ground like farmers preparing fields. Every rock, every tree, every shadow had been chosen. Chenoa's rifle spoke again. Another man fell. Kiona moved through the western trees like wind, her shots coming from different positions, making Hayes's men think they were surrounded by dozens instead of 3. Marcus reached the wagon, cut the ropes binding the hostages. "Run north," he shouted. "Into the forest. Don't stop." Tom Brennan grabbed his arm. "God bless you, son." Then he and the others disappeared into the trees. Now the fight became brutal. Hayes's men, realizing they'd been ambushed, began to coordinate. They laid down, suppressing fire, while others maneuvered. Professional tactics. But Marcus had fought in the war, and Kiona and Chenoa had fought for survival their entire lives. They knew that professional tactics meant predictable patterns, and predictable patterns meant exploitable weaknesses. Marcus fell back to the cabin, using its walls for cover. Bullets chewed into wood, shattered a window, sent splinters flying. He returned fire methodically, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. A man fell. Another ducked behind a tree and didn't emerge. From the eastern rocks, Chenoa had become death itself. Her elevated position gave her clear sight lines, and her aim was surgical. She didn't waste bullets, didn't shoot to wound, just ended threats with the efficiency of someone defending what she loved. Kiona appeared beside Marcus, breathing hard, bleeding from a graze on her arm. 8 down, 15 left, they're grouping for a rush. Let them come. We'll make them regret it. The rush came from 3 directions simultaneously, textbook military tactics designed to overwhelm defensive positions. But the cabin's firing ports gave Marcus and Kiona wide coverage, and Chenoa's high angle allowed her to shoot into the attackers' exposed backs as they charged. The cost was terrible. 5 men fell in the first wave. The survivors broke, scrambling back to cover, their confidence shattered. They'd expected easy work, 2 Indian women and a hermit. Instead, they'd found prepared warriors who knew the ground and wouldn't break. Hayes, wounded but functioning, screamed orders. His remaining men formed up again, but their faces showed it now, the realization that this job wasn't worth dying for, that Hayes's obsession had led them into a meat grinder. One man threw down his weapon and ran. Then another. Hayes shot the second man in the back, killing him for desertion. and that broke something fundamental. The remaining hired guns looked at each other, at Hayes, at the cabin that had become a fortress, and made their choice. They rode away. 7 men, leaving their wounded, leaving their dead, leaving Hayes standing alone in the clearing with his shoulder bleeding and his authority in ruins. Cowards! Hayes screamed after them, "I'll have you all hanged for desertion." But they were already gone. Hayes turned toward the cabin. Marcus stepped onto the porch, rifle pointed center mass. From the rocks, Chenoa had her sights on Hayes's head. In the trees, Kiona's weapon never wavered. "It's over," Marcus said. "You've lost. You killed federal deputies. That's execution-level offense. You used civilians as hostages. That's murder. And last I checked, murder trumps obstruction." Marcus descended the steps. "You came here on a lie, backed by a slaver's testimony, ready to kill innocent women to close a case that should never have been opened. That's not justice. That's evil wearing a badge." Hayes wavered, blood loss, making him pale. The law doesn't protect slavers, doesn't sanction hostage-taking, doesn't forgive murder." Marcus gestured to the bodies scattered across the clearing. "You did this. Your obsession, your willingness to believe lies because they were convenient. These men died because you refused to admit you were wrong." Hayes sank to his knees, the fight draining out of him along with his blood. "I was just doing my job." "So was I," Marcus said. "I was protecting my family." Chenoa and Kiona emerged from their positions, converging on the clearing. They moved to stand beside Marcus, forming a wall of shared purpose. 3 people who'd been alone, now united in something stronger than law or hate, or the systems designed to separate them. Hayes looked up at them, 2 towering Apache women, and the white man who'd chosen them over comfort, over safety, over the easy path of compliance. "You won't get away with this," Hayes whispered. "Others will. Come. Let them," Kiona said. "We will be here. We will be ready. And we will win again." They bound Hayes's wounds, gave him water, loaded him onto a horse. Marcus pinned a note to his coat. "This man came to murder innocent women based on lies. He used civilians as hostages. He killed his own men for refusing illegal orders. If you want justice, investigate him. If you want war, come find us. We'll be waiting." Hayes rode south, broken and defeated, leaving behind a clearing full of bodies, and the truth that some fights are worth having, some stands are worth taking, some families are worth dying for. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the garden where corn grew oblivious to the violence nearby, Marcus and the sisters stood together on the porch. "It is not over," Chenoa said quietly. "Hayes was right about that. Others will come." "Then we'll face them too," Marcus replied. "Together. Always together." Kiona leaned her head against his shoulder. "Together," she echoed. And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd survived and what they'd protected, they understood that family wasn't about blood or law or any authority's permission. It was about choosing each other every day, no matter the cost. They buried the dead at dawn. Not because the men deserved the ceremony, but because leaving bodies to rot would poison the land and their own humanity. Marcus dug while Kiona and Chenoa stood guard, weapons ready in case Hayes's deserters regrouped and returned. The earth was soft from spring thaw, which made the work faster but somehow worse, each shovelful, a reminder of how easily life returned to dirt. 13 graves in a row at the forest's edge, far enough from the cabin that they wouldn't haunt the garden, but close enough that anyone approaching would see the cost of violence. Marcus marked each with a simple stone. No names, just dates. Let history remember them as numbers instead of people, the same way they'd tried to reduce Kiona and Chenoa to property. When the last grave was filled, Chenoa spoke words in Apache, not prayer exactly, but acknowledgement. Marcus caught fragments. Something about spirits finding their way home, about the earth accepting what the sky rejected, about forgiveness being the land's work, not theirs. "You pray for men who tried to kill us," Marcus asked afterward. "I pray that their deaths mean something. Maybe one man who hears this story will choose different." She cleaned her hands in the creek, watched the dirt dissolve into the current. "But mostly I pray for us, that killing them does not make us like them." Back at the cabin, they found Tom Brennan waiting on the porch with 3 other men from Copper Bend, the hostages they'd freed. Tom held a basket covered with cloth, and his eyes were red from weeping or gratitude or both. "We brought food," Tom said. "And word. Hayes made it to town last night barely. Doctors got him stable, but he's talking crazy, claiming you ambushed federal marshals, murdered his men in cold blood." He shook his head. "But we told everyone what really happened. About the hostages, about how you saved us, about Hayes executing his own man for running." Another man stepped forward, younger, nervous. "I'm Deputy Walsh's son. Pa sent me to say the town's with you. Not everyone, but enough. Hayes won't find support if he tries again. And Pa's writing a full report to the territorial governor about what happened here. Truth, not Hayes's lies." The third man, weathered and silent until now, simply extended his hand to Marcus. "Name's Garrett. I was wrong about you." "About them," he nodded toward the sisters. "Told folks in town for months that Indians couldn't be trusted, that you were harboring fugitives, but you risked yourself for strangers. That counts more than blood or color or any of the garbage I believed before." Marcus took his hand. "Appreciate that. Don't thank me. I should have known better sooner." Garrett looked at Kiona and Chenoa. "My apology's worth less than nothing, but I'm offering it anyway. You're welcome in Copper Bend. Anyone says something different, they'll answer me." After the men left, the 3 of them stood in the cabin that had become a battlefield and fortress and home. Sunlight streamed through the broken window, illuminating dust motes and the chaos of yesterday's violence. Overturned furniture, bullet holes in the walls, blood stains on the floorboards that would need scrubbing. "We should repair the window before night," Kiona said, ever practical. But none of them moved. They were running on fumes and adrenaline's ghost, the crash coming now that survival was assured. Marcus sat heavily in his chair. Chenoa sank to the floor. Kiona remained standing, swaying slightly, her wounded arm finally demanding attention. "Let me see," Marcus said, gesturing to her injury. She sat beside him while he cleaned the bullet, graze shallow but painful, a groove across her bicep that would scar but heal clean. Chenoa watched from the floor, her eyes tracking Marcus's gentle hands as he worked, the care he took not to hurt Kiona more than necessary. "You are good at this," Chenoa observed. "The healing, you have kind hands." "Catherine taught me," said a man who could only destroy was half-formed. That real strength was knowing when to build instead of break. Marcus tied off the bandage. "She was right about most things." "Tell us about her," Kiona said quietly. "Not about her death. About her life. Who she was when she laughed." So Marcus did. He told them about Catherine's terrible singing voice that she inflicted on everyone anyway, claiming joy mattered more than pitch. About how she'd refused to learn to shoot because she said the world had enough people who knew how to kill and not enough who knew how to grow things. About the time she'd argued with a traveling preacher for 3 hours about women's souls, reducing him to sputtering fury while she remained calm as stone. "She sounds like someone we would have loved," Chenoa said. "She would have loved you back. Would have fed you too much, taught you her terrible songs, and probably convinced you to help her start a school for children nobody else would teach." Marcus smiled at the memory. She had this idea that education was rebellion, that teaching people to read and think was more dangerous to tyrants than any bullet. "She was right," Kiona said. "You have taught us to read. Now we can learn anything, can argue with anyone, can prove ourselves human in ways they cannot ignore." That afternoon, despite exhaustion, they began repairs, replaced the shattered window with oiled canvas until they could get proper glass, scrubbed blood from the floors using sand and lye soap that made their hands raw, patched bullet holes with clay and wood paste. The physical labor was meditative, each repair an act of reclaiming space that violence had tried to take. As they worked, people came. First, just one or two, then a steady trickle townsfolk from Copper Bend, bringing gifts and apologies, lumber for repairs, glass panes, smoked meat, cloth for bandages. A woman brought a quilt her grandmother had made, said it deserved a home where people fought for each other. A blacksmith brought horseshoes, said he'd heard about their garden and wanted to make sure the deer didn't destroy it. Not everyone came. Some people would never change, would hold their hate and fear until it killed them. But enough came that Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. The story spreading wasn't about dangerous fugitives. It was about a family defending their home against corrupt authority. And that was a story people understood, regardless of whose skin held which color. By evening, the cabin looked almost normal. The repairs were rough but functional, good enough until time and care could make them permanent. They ate from the donated food, Tom's bread, someone's venison jerky, preserves in jars, labeled with names. Marcus didn't recognize but would remember. After dinner, Kiona stood suddenly. "Come, both of you. There is something we must do." She led them to the garden where corn stood nearly a foot tall now, beans beginning to climb the stalks in the traditional Three Sisters pattern. The lowering sun painted everything gold and orange, and the air smelled of growth and possibility. Chenoa began to sing the same song she'd sung while planting, but different now. Richer, more certain. Kiona joined her, their voices weaving together in harmonies that predated borders and wars and all the human inventions that tried to divide the world into pieces. Then Kiona knelt, pressed both palms flat against the earth, and spoke in Apache. When she finished, she translated, "I thanked the land for accepting our blood, for letting us defend it, for letting us belong to it." She looked up at Marcus. "In my mother's tradition, you cannot own land. You can only belong to it, be accepted by it. Today, the land accepted us." Chenoa knelt beside her sister, and after a moment, Marcus knelt too. Three people who'd been cast out by different worlds, now claiming ground that claimed them back. "We should build something," Marcus said, "something permanent. Not just repairs, but creation. Something that says we're staying." "A larger cabin," Kiona suggested, "with room for all of us, proper beds, space to teach, to heal, to live instead of just survive. And a barn," Chenoa added, "for horses and tools for the life we will build." They spent the next week planning. Drew designs in the dirt, argued about roof pitch and window placement, negotiated space the way families do, with compromise and occasional frustration and ultimate unity. The work would take months, maybe years. But time was something they'd earned through blood and bullets, and the refusal to let anyone tell them they didn't deserve a future. Men from town came to help, not all the men who'd ridden with Hayes. Some of those would never return, either dead or too ashamed, but others. Garrett brought timber. Tom organized supply runs. Even Deputy Walsh appeared one afternoon, hammer in hand, and spent 6 hours framing walls without speaking about his complicity in Hayes's actions. His presence was apology enough. The new cabin rose slowly. Larger than the original, with 3 separate sleeping spaces that acknowledged privacy while maintaining proximity. They left the old cabin standing, decided it would become the teaching space Kiona wanted, where she could share Apache wisdom and Marcus could teach reading and writing to whoever wanted to learn. During a break in construction, Chenoa pulled Marcus aside. They walked to the ridge where he'd first spotted Hayes's riders, where so much had almost ended. "I have not told you everything," she said, "about why we were cast out. Kiona told you about our brother drowning, about being too large. But there is more." Marcus waited. Our father returned once more. I was 15, Kiona was 17. He came drunk, violent, tried to force himself on our mother. Chenoa's voice was flat, mechanical. Kiona stopped him, hit him with firewood until he was unconscious. We thought we had killed him. We ran because we thought we were murderers. But you weren't? No. He lived. Woke the next day and told everyone we attacked him for no reason. Said we were cursed, possessed by evil spirits. Our mother, her voice cracked, our mother believed him, or pretended to. Either way, she told us to leave. Said we had shamed her, endangered the tribe, proven that our white blood made us savage. Marcus felt rage build, but forced it down. Chenoa didn't need his anger. She needed his witness. For 8 years we wandered, attacked by men who saw us as exotic prizes, rejected by tribes who saw us as contaminated, captured by slavers who saw us as profit. She turned to face him. And then you saw us as people, just people who needed help. That was the first time in our lives anyone looked at us without calculation or disgust or fear, just kindness. You deserved kindness, Marcus said simply. Maybe, but deserving and receiving are different things. Most people get what they do not deserve and never get what they do. She touched his arm. You gave us something we did not know we could have. Not just freedom, not just safety, but belonging. The feeling that we are allowed to exist without apology. That night, around the fire in the old cabin where everything had begun, Kiona asked Marcus, "Do you still hear them? Your wife and daughter?" "Yes, but it's different now. Before, their absence was a wound that wouldn't close. Now it's..." He searched for words. "Like a scar that's healed wrong but doesn't hurt anymore. I can feel where they were, but it doesn't stop me from feeling what's here now." "That is good," Kiona said. "The dead should not trap the living. They should free us to continue. Is that Apache wisdom?" "No. That is Kiona wisdom. Apache tradition says the dead must be forgotten so their spirits can move on. But I think both can be true. We can remember them and still build a new life." On the first day of May, they held a ceremony. Not Apache, not Christian, but something they created together, a blending of traditions that honored both continuity and transformation. They planted a tree at the new cabin's entrance, a young pine they'd transplanted from the forest. Around its base, they buried 3 items: Catherine's blue ribbon, a piece of cloth from Chenoa, and Kiona's mother's dress that they'd carried for years, and a bullet from yesterday's battle. The past, the heritage, and the price of now, Kiona explained, all feeding the future. As the tree settled into its new soil, Marcus felt something release in his chest, not forgetting, but permission to move forward without guilt. Catherine and Sarah would always be part of him, but they didn't have to be all of him. He could love what was lost while also loving what he'd found. By midsummer, the new cabin was finished. 3 rooms connected by a common area, with a stone hearth large enough to heat everything, windows that caught morning light, a porch wide enough for all of them to sit together in the evening. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, built with their hands, blessed by their sweat, defended by their blood. The garden flourished. Corn grew tall, beans climbed strong, squash sprawled across the ground in leafy abundance. They harvested the first vegetables in late July, and Chenoa cooked a feast that drew half of Copper Bend. People who'd never shared a meal with Indians before sat beside Kiona and Chenoa, listened to their stories, learned to pronounce Apache words that had no English equivalent. Garrett brought his daughter, a shy girl of 12, who stared at the sisters with undisguised awe. "Are you really Giants?" she asked. "We are really tall," Kiona corrected, gently. "But Giant is just a word people use when they don't understand something. We are women, large women, but still just women." "I think it's wonderful," the girl said. "Being tall, being strong, being different. Then you will do well in this world, Chenoa told her, because different is not a curse. It is power if you choose to claim it. As autumn approached, they received word that Hayes had been formally discharged from the Marshal Service, pending investigation into his conduct. Judge Holbrook had reviewed Deputy Walsh's report and Walsh's testimony from the rescued hostages. The case against Kiona and Chenoa was officially closed, marked as false charges based on unreliable testimony. They were free not just in practice, but in law. "It does not feel different," Kiona said when Marcus told her, "We were already free. The paper just confirms what we knew." But Marcus saw her shoulders relax slightly, saw Chenoa's smile reach her eyes in a way it hadn't before. Official freedom mattered, even to people who'd claimed it for themselves already. On the first snow of the next winter, exactly 1 year after the sisters had greeted the previous year's first snow, they gathered on the porch of the new cabin. The garden lay dormant, waiting for spring. The old cabin had become a school, with 6 children attending 3 times a week to learn reading and mathematics and Apache wisdom. The barn housed 2 horses, a cow, and enough hay to last until thaw. Marcus sat in the middle, Chenoa on his left, Kiona on his right. They didn't speak, just watched snow fall on land they defended and claimed and made their own. "Do you ever regret it?" Chenoa asked finally. "Giving up your money, your solitude, your simple life?" Marcus thought about the man who'd stepped off that freight car a year ago, hollow, half dead, going through the motions of existence without purpose. Then he thought about who he was now, father to 2 fierce daughters not of his blood but of his choosing, builder of futures instead of guardian of graves, alive instead of merely breathing. "No," he said, "not for 1 second. "Good," Kiona said, "because you are stuck with us now, forever, or until we die, whichever comes last. I can live with that." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the cabin's lights grew brighter in contrast. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth that had never known Catherine's touch but held her spirit anyway. On the mantel, the blue ribbon sat beside an Apache medicine bag and the wooden horse Sarah never got to hold. Past and present and future, woven together like the 3 sisters in the garden, separate but interdependent, each making the others stronger. The snow continued falling, covering everything in fresh white, and in that erasure was promise. Tomorrow they would wake up and choose each other again, would tend their land, teach their students, defend their home if necessary, would be family, not because law said so, but because they decided nothing else mattered more. And in the distance, through the falling snow, a raven called once, not warning this time, but witnessing, acknowledging that 3 people who'd been told they were wrong had built something right, something that would endure long after snow melted and seasons turned and those who'd tried to destroy them were forgotten. They had planted seeds in soil that accepted them, had defended ground that claimed them back, had transformed from fragments into something whole. Not happily ever after, because life doesn't end in simple happiness, but something better purposefully, deliberately, fiercely, ever after, together. And that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.